From the very beginning, this story was wrong. Everything was going great. And then all of a sudden, you know, this huge tidal wave comes in. When that tidal wave came, was it completely out of the blue, or did you think that there was something around the edges that didn't feel right?
2019 to 2021, Brent, I will tell you, it only got better. And so we went from a company that BuzzFeed wanted to buy for $300 million to a company that JP Morgan thought was worth $2 billion. And 3 months later, we did yet another deal, which of course they wouldn't have done if they fundamentally thought a crime had been committed, or they thought that there was fraud, or they thought that they were dealing with dishonest organization.
In this case, the story had to be that you told him to do this and you told him how to do it so that he could get a substantial departure. But the only way that he wins in it is to get a conviction of Carlos Watson.
I mean, the name of the podcast is Nightmare Success. So I guess you know things have gone left when kindergarten stories are in your Wikipedia. So,
all right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners and watchers. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Don't forget to follow, subscribe, like this thing up. I appreciate it. It helps the show. Folks, I've got a really riveting story today, and I've got an incredible guest that I'm interviewing, Carlos Watson, and give you a little bit of background on Carlos. And you might have seen Carlos on a lot of different things because he's been all over TV, but Carlos Watson is an American entrepreneur. He's a television host of the Carlos Watson Show. He's a co-founder and CEO of OZY Media. Carlos was a graduate of Harvard, and then he went to Stanford University. So he went to Harvard, and then he went to Stanford to get his law degree. But he not only just kind of hung out and got a law degree there, he was the editor of the Stanford Law Review. He was also the president of the Stanford Law School student government. He made a footprint there that lasted. So Carlos also spent time at Goldman Sachs. His television career spanned Fox, Court TV, CNBC, MSNBC, CNN. He partnered with Oprah Winfrey on OWN as an executive producer for Black Women Own the Conversation. So how in the world did Carlos find himself on the Nightmare Success podcast, experiencing his worst nightmare? Well, this is my overview of it from reading and watching the documentary of Whose Son Is Next. It's on YouTube of Carlos, but it appears to me that it started with BuzzFeed, and it was an attempt for BuzzFeed to acquire OZY Media, and they made numerous offers. I think it was 4 offers, and Carlos, being who he is, he turned down all 4 offers, and the last one was up to $300 million. So this was big money that we were talking about. I think one of the reasons that Carlos turned it down, and he certainly hasn't told me this, but an astute guy that's an attorney at Goldman Sachs, BuzzFeed was having issues, and they were making acquisitions because maybe they desperately needed to. And Carlos had a lot of confidence in what he was doing with OZY Media at the time. And if he figured it was worth $300 million, maybe it was worth double that if he could continue to go. Interestingly enough, Ben Smith, who was the editor in chief at BuzzFeed, and at the time, this guy was known as the first guy that released the Steele dossier. If anybody remembers that started the national political firestorm with Donald Trump, president at the time. Interestingly enough, Ben had millions of dollars of stock options with BuzzFeed. He left BuzzFeed and he went to the New York Times. He started writing some damaging investigative articles about OZY Media, but he never was disclosing the conflict of interest that he had with all those stock options. And maybe he was a little ticked off about the fact that the deal didn't go through with OZY Media. That's just me. I'm just saying that's my opinion on this. These articles caught the attention of the DOJ, and away things went. It ended up with Carlos going to trial and losing in July. His case was riddled with details of the judge having financial ties to the victims in this case, creating an undeniable shadow over the fairness of the proceedings. Carlos, after the guilty verdict, was immediately remanded to a hardcore jail for 5 weeks before he was able to post a multi-million-dollar bail bond. He's now facing 37 years in federal prison, and he's currently fighting for his life and appealing everything he can before his sentencing December 13th. As I said, Carlos's documentary, which is it'll take your breath away. It's a 2-part series on YouTube. It's called Whose Son Is Next. I can't wait to unpack all this with Carlos. This is an unusual episode for us because usually someone has gone through their nightmare and they talk about it. Carlos is in the middle of fighting through his nightmare, and I am a hardcore believer in Carlos and his story, and I wanted to get it out. We're going to release this as soon as we record this and release it tomorrow. Before we jump into all this, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all the pain and hassle of getting a car. Go to Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you, negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and finance. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Welcome in, Carlos Watson. How are you, my man?
Hey, Brent. I'm good. I'd be better if I was in St. Louis eating ribs with the family, but that may or may not be down the road.
Well, I know you have been through, it's been, I mean, it hasn't been that long ago that you went through your case in July, and you've been going through all the nightmarish steps that are part of that. But your life and your life story is incredible. And what you've been able to accomplish up to this time is inspiring. And I want to go back a little bit just so the listeners, the viewers, the audience can get a little taste of what it was like for you to get where you were, Carlos. What was life, your mom, your dad, siblings growing up? Give us a little bit.
Sure. Well, so I grew up in Miami, Florida, son of 2 teachers, Carlos Sr. and Rose, so I'm a junior. I had 3 sisters, 3 great sisters. I didn't always give them that title when we were growing up, but they were. I came to learn that I got a good deal.
Where did you fit into that pecking order? Were you the youngest?
What do I feel like? Do I feel like the youngest? What do I feel like so far? Have you guessed what I feel like so far?
I would think, because I watched the documentary and that I would think that they try to take care of Carlos. So you are?
You know what? I'm number 2 in the lineup. So I have a wonderful sister. I've got 2 great younger sisters. We're all pretty close. My parents were late in life parents, Brent. So back in the day, having kids in your mid to late 30s was considered late. Yeah. And so my mom had 4 of us between the ages of 36 and 41, which today would probably be like the equivalent of, 45 to 50. Sure. And so we were all pretty close together. And, it was, in a lot of ways we were blessed. I mean, good parents, especially my mom. I used to tell her that she was the Muhammad Ali of moms. I told her that ounce per ounce, she was the greatest. Didn't mean she was perfect, but she was, thoughtful, positive. I think took each child on their own and was trying to kind of help them. And again, I think a lot of the teacher in her, both my parents grew up in big families. My mom was the second of 7. My dad was the 5th of 6. So they were kind of warm people. Money was tight. We had a spell on food stamps and had some other things which weren't what any of us would have wanted, but we were a tight knit group. And Miami in the 70s and 80s had a fair amount of racial issues. Before the Rodney King riots of 92, Miami had a lot of that throughout the 80s. Unfortunately, they killed a number of Black men. The police did. And that led to a lot of danger. I remember my mom was so scared for me to start driving when I turned 16, and she wouldn't go to sleep when I went out on the weekends. In fact, when I had to call her, there were payphones in those days, if you remember.
Yeah. I
Call
remember
her.
the payphones.
You
I
remember?
think are you 55?
I am.
All right, I'm 57, so
Are you?
we're kind of in the same era. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, you know what, Brent? You must have a little melanin somewhere in there. Someone sprinkled something in the 23andMe because you look healthy. So it's good. That's good. You're well.
Yeah, I know the Cassidys definitely have to have that.
Yeah. You're well preserved. That's good. Not that some of my other brothers aren't, but some, everybody got their own journey. Growing up, what I would say is that no matter how tough things were, Brent, they were hopeful and they were optimistic that tomorrow could be better than today.
Yeah.
And for whatever combination of reasons, they brought that optimism. And I will say that their siblings and my grandmother, particularly my mom's mom, who lived to be 102, she was great at sharing not only history, but sharing history as related to you. And so if I was going through something really difficult, like I was in a very bad car accident at 11, and they thought I was never going to walk again. In fact, I couldn't walk for 3 years. So Imagine not being able to walk all of junior high school, and no one in high school's ever seen you, Brent, walk, right? And so you show up and no one's ever seen you walk. But my grandmother would just remind me about a whole series of things, including my great grandfather, who was a runaway slave. He had run away from North Carolina up to kind of Virginia, D.C. It kind of hid out in the swamps, and then post-Civil War came out and settled, near Richmond, not exactly Richmond, but near Richmond. And she just, she would say, when hard things get hard, hard people get harder. And so she would always, or she'd say, keep on keeping on. So, I would say I grew up, in Miami, very global, very diverse, good parents, some tough times, money wise, love sports to death. Love football. I grew up as the U. If anyone's a college football fan, when the U was taken off, that was mine. Dad and I we loved Reggie Jackson and the Yankees. We loved Dr. J and the Sixers. I loved the Cleveland Browns. Dad and I together liked Staubach and the Cowboys, and I liked the Raiders. And so I liked.
I always loved their uniforms.
Loved their uniforms. Loved Lester the Molester Hayes and the rest of those boys.
Stuff on his hands.
Oh man, Cliffy Branch and all those guys. So I loved all of those guys. So I love that. I ended up loving books. I ended up becoming a reader. Hardy Boys, if you remember.
Yeah, I love the Hardy Boys.
Encyclopedia Brown and what was the name of that one? Tom. Oh my goodness, science fiction one. Tom. Oh man, I can't even remember it. But I was a reader, and that was kind of it for me. But it was a Miami that was undergoing change. If anyone's ever seen the movie The Cocaine Cowboys, that was kind of while I was growing up. Miami went from kind of a sleepy town to we got reimagined because of the Mariel boat lift, which fundamentally changed who we were, and then the drug wars kind of changed who we were. And so by the time I left, Miami wasn't South Beach, Miami, but it was in motion. It was in transformation.
Well, and Carlos, I think it's pretty incredible from what you just said. You went to Harvard. That's an incredible leap of out of your neighborhood into Harvard. What was that like?
It truly was a wonderful experience. Doesn't mean it was perfect, but I learned a lot. I met a lot of good people, a lot of people I'm still friends with to this day. I think it was one of those things, Brent, where you go and you're nervous and you're wondering whether you can fit in, whether you can measure up. But as you stick to it and stick through it, and there was a really nice woman from South Texas, may she rest in peace, Ronnie Rochelle Garcia. I remember she told me her grandmother used to say, "Never show your pearls to pigs." I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded good. It sounded like
really good.
Don't give up so easy. And so that's how I took it. But Ronnie Rochelle, she's up there somewhere. So but met a lot of good people, had wonderful professors, and one in particular, also rest in peace, a guy named Martin Kilson, who I like to say made me not just an emotional optimist, but maybe an intellectual optimist. Made me feel that even the most difficult situations could be thought about. Sometimes, not always, could be resolved, could be worked through. And so I really appreciated. He would challenge me. He would sometimes encourage me. He had a wicked sense of humor. I remember I was short on money, and it was cold up there. I come from Miami. I didn't have a coat, and
oh yeah, I bet it felt really cold up there.
oh man, I applied for a scholarship, and I said, Professor Kilson, I want to thank you so much for writing that letter of recommendation for me. I just found out I'm a finalist, and without missing a beat, he said, "Oh, that was for you." I said, Professor Kilson, that's not funny, dude. I said, I need the coat. I need the scholarship. I need the coat. It's cold out here. Don't joke around. That's real stuff. So, but he had a great sense of humor, and so while he was teaching me and challenging me, he also brought a level of warmth and kindness. So, it was tough, Brent, but I'll always be grateful for it. I do feel like I learned a lot, and I learned a lot. Not only in the classroom, but outside of it. So it was good.
Yeah, and I feel like that must have gained you confidence because you excelled. I mean, you were not just a student there, but excelled there. And then your next step was stepping all the way across the other side of the world to Stanford. And like I said in the opening, I mean, you weren't just a student at Stanford. You were at the top of the heap at Stanford. And I'm curious, at that point in your life, were you thinking, I'm going to go out and be this rock star attorney, or were you thinking this is another stepping stone to getting this law degree? What was going on in your mind? Because not all attorneys go and create a huge media company and they get in and become a person who's known in the media world. Was that always in the back of your mind that you were going to be that guy, or were you thinking, no, I'm going to roll in and I'm Stanford educated law. I'm going to be a big time law guy.
You know what? I wasn't sure. I mean, my dad had wanted to be a lawyer, and I don't know if you had this experience, Brent, but you obviously can be impacted by your parents and guided.
Yeah, my dad was an attorney.
Oh, was he? Okay, yeah. So my dad had wanted to be, and so that sat there, and there were other people who I admired. I'd obviously read about Thurgood Marshall and lots of other people, and for folks like my grandmother who had grown up in Mississippi and lived in Virginia, so lived in the segregated South, some lawyers had been incredible freedom fighters. And so they had kind of an exalted place in the family. And so I thought about it. I was a copy boy at the biggest, fanciest law firm in Miami when I was in high school. So I was a guy who brought a lot.
So I gave you a taste of it. Yeah.
I didn't like it one bit. None of the guys seemed to enjoy it. They seemed bored out of their skull. I'd bring the mail around. They just did not seem to enjoy it. So when I was graduating from college, I was not focused on going to law school, but I read this great book, and it talked about all the people who had law degrees but hadn't become lawyers. So they talked about your boy Scott Turow, the writer. They talked about a guy who had ended up managing a bunch of baseball teams, Sandy Alderson. They talked about John Grisham, the novelist. They talked about business leaders, political leaders. They talked about there was a great sports announcer who Dad and I used to like named Howard Cosell, who was a lawyer. And so I think that made me more open to going to law school. The idea that yes, I might do that. And, after law school, I didn't go practice law, much to the chagrin of my grandmother. And in fact, when she came for graduation at the time, she was 93. And Grandma came and kind of walked over slowly to me, and she said, "Son, I'm so proud of you." She said, "So what are you going to do next?" And I said, "Grandma, I'm going to be a consultant." She paused. She said, "So what are you going to do next?" I said, "I'm going to be a consultant." She paused, and she said, and without missing a beat, she turned her head as though I wasn't there. She said, because you remember this was the early 90s, so consultant meant unemployed. And she said, "I thought the boy always did well." Don't you know anyone? So my mom, I went to go work for this big consulting firm named McKinsey, which if you come from where I come from, no one knows what that is. But they helped companies that were struggling. And my mom said, "Okay, go get your offer letter and go show it to grandma, and then go to the library and photocopy an article so she could show all her friends.
Sure.
And grandma would nod her head. That was nice. She says, when are you taking the bar? And I wasn't going to take the bar. Mom said, oh, now you're taking the bar. Oh, yes, you are. She needs that bar receipt for her friends. So I took the bar that summer for grandma, and but I went into business right away. I went to go work at a big consulting firm, and then I did some more. But I didn't know for sure, to your question, going into law school, what exactly I would do. But I was hopeful that I would have a little bit of flexibility.
Well, and you created a company that you were able to, I think you sold to Kaplan. And how did that work into all the different things that you were doing?
Yeah.
Because it ended up to be a pretty good sized company that you
It ended up being a
created.
pretty good sized company. And I started with one of my sisters and with another friend, and it was called
Achieva.
Achieva. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and we were a college prep company. So you know that a lot of big high schools may have 2,000-3,000 kids, but they only have one counselor. So a lot of kids never get help with the whole college admissions process. Right. And so Achieva would help kids not only figure out what school you go to, but how you're going to pay for it. What are these essays they're asking you for? Who do you ask for a letter of recommendation? How do you do well on the test? Almost like a virtual college counselor
situation, right?
Correct. And we had, back in those days, software, we had books, we had workshops. We worked in 75 school districts across 22 states. I think we worked with about 100,000 students a year.
No, I read about it. I was really impressed with it, Carlos. That it wasn't just something that you strung together. That was a big, nice, important, impactful company.
Yeah. And I'd always loved helping students. I had one of the things I didn't mention is early on I had some challenges in school, and I was seen early on as a bad kid, and in fact, believe it or not, was kicked out of kindergarten. Which people always say, "How do you get kicked out of kindergarten?"
I saw that. That is in your Wikipedia, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Yeah. Well,
who has that in their Wikipedia?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the name of the podcast is Nightmare Success. So I guess things have gone left when kindergarten stories are in your Wikipedia. So back to where I started, I guess. But I ended up really enjoying working with other students. And I remember when I was in high school, there were these two young men, Keith and Jonathan, who were in 7th grade, and my mom was teaching at a kind of a tough junior high school, and they were giving her a really hard time. And I came in and visited my mom's class one day, and I saw those guys, and I knew from having been a kid who got in trouble a lot himself that sometimes you're causing trouble because you're bored, you're insecure, you're lonely, you can't follow what was going on. Sure. So I ended up talking to the guys. I realized that there were some things going on, and I ended up becoming a little bit of a mentor. And I worked at the local grocery store. If anyone knows Publix, where shopping is a pleasure, that's where I worked. I was the guy in the green apron, and I ended up helping the guys get jobs. And I really liked the opportunity to do for them what other people had done for me, which is kind of mentor and guide them. And so after college and grad school, while I went to work in business, I still kind of missed the idea of helping young people. And I was running a volunteer program in my neighborhood. I lived at the time in a very, it was briefly the murder capital of the country. It's called East Palo Alto, California. If anyone's a Devontae Adams fan, that's where he's from, or others. But I just, a lot of the young fellas, were having a tough time. They didn't always have guidance. Even if they made it to college, one of my students, Chris, who had gone to Morehouse, I bumped into him at a Safeway, and not that Safeway's bad, because again, I worked at Publix, but he was the first in his family going to school, and I knew his grandmother and others were counting on him. And so for me to walk in Safeway and see him there made me think a lot about progress. And there was a young fellow named Miguel, who I ended up seeing at the Redwood movie cinema. And Miguel had gotten into UCLA, and so I kind of knew that wasn't exactly the plan that his mom and dad had for him. So I think even though I was doing this business work with big companies during the day at McKinsey, I think my heart was still with a lot of these young folks, and
that's where your passion was.
Yeah, and so I think Achieva allowed me to blend those a little bit, and but it was a challenge, that's for sure. It was a lot of work.
So you jumped out of that. You get bought by a big company. What were you thinking then?
I was grateful that we had succeeded. Most startups, die.
Right.
Most startups
Early on. Right.
early on, even the biggest ones, Google Glasses or Quibi or
Hmm.
Friendster or any of those kinds of things. Borders.com, if you remember
Yeah.
that. uh, but I was thinking about what to do next. I went traveling for a little bit, which I really enjoyed. I met some nice friends, particularly in Vietnam. If anyone's been Vietnam, been up in the countryside of Vietnam, where the Hmong people, spelled with an H, are, and met a number of good folks there. But I came back and was thinking about what to do next, and got an opportunity to do some TV, do some punditry. I got in an argument with a guy named Bill O'Reilly. Afterwards, his producer, David, said, "Hey, will you hang on? Mr. O'Reilly wants to speak to you." And I thought, oh, shit. Because that used to happen in elementary school where I'd get in trouble with Mr.
Right. We're going to call you back.
Right. And, he said, "Hey, Mr. Watson, you and I may not agree on everything, but I like how you do what you do. And I really want to encourage you." And sure enough, that really accelerated. So I ended up hosting shows at CNBC and CNN and MSNBC. And so I really ended up getting a chance to learn from Wolf Blitzer and Anderson Cooper and lots of other folks who I admire. Neil Cavuto, if you're out there, really appreciated him as well.
Well, it's an incredible rise in that world, because that's, again, not an easy world to get into. And obviously people, they recognize talent, and then they reach back out to somebody, and obviously you were able to take onto that talent. But I think, from me looking at, and I've kind of done it. I feel like I know you, Carlos, after the last week or so, but it seems like every step along the way, you were just gaining more and more confidence. And it seemed like a natural progression for you to think, wow, I could do this myself in a media world, and kind of come at it in a different way. And the story is it was you and your mom at a kitchen table. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the very table I'm at. So my mom, again, she was a super creative person, Brent. I really believe if she were born today, she would run something massive, because she was one of the few people who was both a visionary and really good operationally. And then I think as a former teacher, she had enormous EQ. So she knew that Brent is going to do best with this. Sarah's going to do best with that.
Path.
Right. Yeah. And she was very thoughtful about it. And you would see that. And so, I moved out in 2012. I was in New York, and that's where I'd gone to do TV. I had moved my parents from Miami out to the Bay Area. And then in 2012, my mom had gotten sick. So they'd been here about a decade, more or less, at that point. And my mom had gotten sick, and we found out she had late stage cancer. And, about a month into taking care of her, we were going to hospitals all the time, trying to get second opinions, hoping against hope. Her mom had lived to 102, and we'd always joked that she was going to get to $1.25 and I was going to get to $1.50. So we weren't ready to, wave the flag yet. And so, about a month into it, she said, "I feel like you're just too young to be at doctor's offices all day, every day. I want to get you busy." And when my mom said that, she didn't mean, we're going to think about it, we're going to take time. She meant, nope. On the way home from the hospital, we're going to go by Office Depot. We're going to get a whiteboard. We actually put it behind us there, and she would talk and I would write. And then
I love this story.
She loved yellow pads. She loved those yellow legal pads. And we would just kind of dream. She was a good thought partner. And my dad's a big idea guy too. Can't leave him out of here. And so we brainstormed the business plan together. Everybody put money in. We came up with a concept for a new kind of news and media company. Somebody described us as the love child of Vice and The Economist. So we wanted to profile what we called the new and the next. So if you were a rising star, a new trend, a big idea that was kind of a year or two before CNN or the Washington Post would cover it, we wanted to talk about you. So we would talk about this comedian from South Africa before people knew Trevor Noah, or this bartender before she was AOC, or this young high school kid in St. Louis before he was Jason Tatum, or a high school girl with braces before she was Simone Biles, or this young British singer before she was Dua Lipa. So we love being that kind of cutting edge place for you. And we started with newsletters and a website. And over time, took the best of our reporting and turned them into TV shows for PBS and the BBC and others. We did that with podcasts. So we take the same reporting that was in our newsletter, turn them into podcasts like The Thread. And then we would, we had these great festivals in Central Park called OZY Fest. Not to be,
I mean, these things are great. It's like a good time.
It was a good time. It was a good time. And so it really, for a time there, as you said, from 2012 when we formed the company to 2013 when we launched to 2016 when we started diversifying to 2019 when it really felt like we were starting to come into our own and people wanted to buy us. We really were starting to feel like, hey, against all odds, maybe we've got something here.
Yeah, and Carlos, it's not easy doing all that, but you were also an incredible, the Carlos Watson show, which, if you can see it now, it's if you want to look up YouTube or whatever, but it was a great show. You were a great interviewer. I mean, you had a lot of different talents, but it's not easy to sit down and talk to all the different individuals, but you had a unique talent to bring all kinds of different individuals on and create that story. But, which kind of brings us to, everything was going great. I mean, what you had set down at the table to talk to and whiteboard out and do that, you guys had done that. You were doing that. And then all of a sudden, this huge tidal wave comes in. When that tidal wave came, was it completely out of the blue, or did you think that there was something around the edges that didn't feel right?
It was out of the blue. So again, we started in 2012, and as you said, it was very homegrown. My parents literally built the furniture for our first office. They hired the interns. They made the first.
That's what I love about this. Is the whole family goes into this thing and puts money in and builds things, and then it takes off.
Yeah. No, we all believed, and I think there was a deep hope that this would be around for a long time, and that's part of the reason why in 2019, when BuzzFeed tried hard to buy us, part of it is we didn't fully believe in what they were doing in terms of kind of being a clickbait empire. Right. But part of it was we wanted to build something that would be around for a long time, that would have a fresh and independent voice that might elevate underheard or underserved voices, the new and the next, really readily. And frankly, at that time, there weren't almost any Black-owned mainstream news companies that were winning Emmys and submitting for Pulitzers and partnering with PBS and BBC and History Channel and A&E and OWN and all of those. So I think we were really hopeful. And sure enough, from 2019 to 2021, Brent, I will tell you, it only got better. And so we went from a company that BuzzFeed wanted to buy for $300 million to a company that JP Morgan thought was worth $2 billion. So over that next 18 months, we grew in value 6 or 7x. And we were on the verge of becoming the first publicly traded company in Silicon Valley history that was Black-owned. So there have been lots of publicly traded companies, Apple, Tesla, Uber, Airbnb, but weirdly enough, I always say there are more Black presidents than there are Black publicly traded companies in Silicon Valley, which is very sad. But it's a commentary on how hard it is to build a startup out here. And so we were just about on the edge. We were discussing kind of pre-IPO rounds. We were getting ready for that when the guy who tried to buy us came back and tried to destroy us. And he did it in part by writing about a real thing that happened. My former colleague pretended to be someone on a reference call. But rather than state that as a real thing that happened, Smith told that as a story of OZY's always been a house of cards and everything about it is BS and it's media Theranos. And so despite the fact that we had 5 really healthy, thriving daily or weekly newsletters that went out to millions, if not tens of millions of people every day, despite the fact that we had 14 TV shows on 9 networks, 1 an Emmy, we had 10 podcasts, 2 were in the top 10, The Thread and Flashback, we had 4 festivals, we had 229 clients, including Coke, Target, Walmart. You would advertise in our newsletters or TV shows or podcasts or festivals. He called us media Theranos. And he didn't tell his editors at the Times that he had spent 6 months trying to buy us or that he'd signed an NDA or that he had looked through all of our content, our audience, our finances, our team. And
big deal. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal, incredibly unethical. And for those who end up not trusting big media, including the New York Times, certainly experiences like that make you suspicious. And so they ran 7 front page stories in September and October of 2021 in 7 days, basically smearing us, lying about us, making us seem build a narrative, and almost all of my investors walked away. Most of my employees, at that point, we probably had 300 or 400 people, both full time and freelance.
And the other thing too, a lot of people talking about big media and that. I mean, you had worked your way into being a board member on NPR, National Public. That's your status in the world of media had gotten to a point where you were a very credible, seen as the next innovation guy, and it's always, when you see these things happen, as the media can just feed as a vulture within that time period, it builds a narrative that is really tough to push back on, because it creates so much momentum.
Yeah.
And I think, from where you were, I mean, what was going through your mind when that all came out?
I was taken aback. I probably was surprised at how quickly people believed it.
Yeah.
Even people who I'd known most of my life, people whose kids I'd taken off to college, people whose might help them with their parents when they were sick, people I'd helped through job transitions, people whose kids had worked for me, who I'd written, college recommendations for. So it was, even though intellectually, it can happen, it was disorienting.
And I think, from the very beginning, this story was wrong from when I'm saying wrong, like factually, your co-founder, chief operating officer, he impersonated a person, a YouTube executive on a big call.
Right.
I forget, was it JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs? I can't remember which, but what I thought was, it's you can go back and you can see that he took the blame for that, and he apologized, and he talked about you being patient and sympathetic, because it was a mental issue that he had struggled with, and he talked about struggling with it, and you didn't let him go, you let him work through it. You apologized for him, but his story at the very beginning is it was him reaching out, doing things that he shouldn't have been doing. And when we have a big company, you are at the top of the helm, but the ability to completely control bad behavior is tough. You can apologize for it, you can make amends for it, but somebody can step out of line, and that's what you did. You apologized. You said, "This is what this is." But that story was the genesis of the DOJ's explosion into OZY Media. But it's very simple to go back and look at what he said at the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, it's a story and how Smith very purposefully smeared me and mischaracterized it, because he characterized it as a pitch, which already makes it loaded. And whereas in truth, we had already signed the contract with Goldman to do the investment. They did reference calls as they do. They talked to NBC, to Hulu, to TikTok, to others. This was the next to last. Doesn't make what Samir did right, but it makes it fundamentally different.
It was a reference checking on something that they'd already agreed to.
It was a reference check. And so much so that while Goldman was unhappy with it and didn't move forward with that deal, 2 weeks later, we did a new deal with them. And 3 months later, we did yet another deal, which of course they wouldn't have done if they fundamentally thought a crime had been committed, or they thought that there was fraud, or they thought that they were dealing with dishonest organization. The same is true with Google, who was involved. They also 3 months later came and offered not 25,000, but to invest 25 million.
25 million.
In OZY, which they wouldn't have done if they thought that there was like fraud going on or what have you. These are super sophisticated companies. So, and in Samir's case, he wrote not one, not two, but 3 confession letters, 6 pages, wrote them with his wife, who's a partner at McKinsey, with his brother, who's a criminal defense lawyer, with his father, who's an engineer, with an outside lawyer. And what the prosecutors tried to do, and I didn't appreciate how easily they can lie as well, is they tried to say that somehow Samir was talked into doing that, even though they had all three letters. They had Samir sending notes to his father, his brother, his wife, his outside lawyer publicist saying, this is what I've worked on. Do you like this version? Do you like that? And in those versions, he says very clearly, I did it and did it alone. He apologizes to me. It's not a one sentence letter. It's 6 pages. Like, it's detailed. Yeah. And so I think I was probably a little bit naive about how easily the teardown machine can work. And I think I probably was more hopeful about the truth prevailing than turned out to be reality.
Well, it's a story about what it feels like when you see the United States of America versus your name, because there's so many ways to get at an issue like this with the chief operating officer. He clearly said it was him. He clearly said that he was the one that did this, but he became the cornerstone of what they said. And for those out there, there's a thing called a 5K letter. And so you can take somebody, let's say this chief operating officer, and you know that you've got this as a guy that you want him to paint a picture for what they need to get a conviction of the top guy. And the 5K letter is maybe the most powerful letter that you can give in the justice system within the indictment and conviction of someone on a plea, because it's a downward departure to where you could go from 25 years to probation, but you have to give substantial assistance. And that's what a 5K, but substantial assistance means conviction. So in a lot of these cases, what a lot of people don't realize is that when you get into these big cases like this, they look for people that can tell a story, and the story is is their narrative. And in this case, the story had to be that you told him to do this and you told him how to do it so that he could get a substantial depart. But the only way that he wins in it is to get a conviction of Carlos Watson. And only reason I bring that up is, Carlos, I think a lot of people don't understand how that works. You know, how do these people who are a lot of times in these companies end up changing stories, and their story changes so much that it appears to be the exact story that the prosecutor needs to tell to the jury. And it didn't start out that way.
You know, Brent, it's crazy. And again, even as someone who went to law school, I did not appreciate how our system works. There's a terrific book by a Harvard Law School professor named Alexandra Nadapoff called Snitching. And she talks about the fact that one of the reasons that the Justice Department wins 99.6% of the cases, I'll say that again, 99.6%.
In the United States of America.
In the United States of America. So 72,000 people are prosecuted every year, and less than 300 get to go home. So 71,700 go to prison in one form or another. It's insane. And part of the way that happens is this whole system of getting people who've done wrong to try and point the finger, usually at someone more senior, whether or not they did anything or not. And it happens so much, and it's now become so built into their system that there's another book by a current judge, one of the preeminent federal judges named Jed Rakoff, called Why Innocent People Plead Guilty. And so it is it's a crazy system. I think it leads to a scenario in which, you know, we're taught by movies and TV that maybe there are 1 or 2 innocent people in jail, but not more than that. And those people will be rescued by some documentary or podcast 20 years from now, like the movie The Hurricane. But the truth of the matter is, my limited experience tells me there's way more. And that even though it frustrates people and they're going to hear it as a political statement, I don't mean it to be. When President-elect Trump says that we have got a lawless system and that our justice system is not delivering justice, I would encourage even people who didn't vote for him to pause, because he is right. Yeah. You would be shocked by the amount of wrongful prosecutions, false charges, hiding evidence, covering up, giving people these 5K letters so they will lie about someone who's actually innocent.
Well, you talk about the 5K letter. If Carlos, I turn that around, And I say that Carlos Watson went to your chief operating officer, and I said, I need you to say this and say it this way, or you don't get whatever I'm going to give you. You know what that's called? It's called witness tampering.
Right.
But it's you
Yeah.
can't do that on that side.
Yeah.
They'll give you another charge. But on this side, you have the deck stacked to where that 5K letter is a power tool to create the extended narrative that they need to be able to bring the people in to tell the story. So I just think it's interesting how when you can actually flip something on the side and you can call it witness tampering, or you can call it substantial cooperation.
Well, you know, I think this system is so dangerous also, not just the way it's set up, but because the people in it have in many cases, not every case, but in many cases have been brainwashed to believe that it's fair, and have been brainwashed. They call themselves public servants, and they genuinely believe that. And they believe that despite the 99.6% number. In fact, they think of the 99.6% number as proof that they're doing a good job.
They're really good at it. And I think, Carlos, that is such a strong point to this point. When you walk in a courtroom, and you're one of the very few that walk in a courtroom, you know, I think it's 97% of the people indicted, they plead. For those very, very few that walk in the courtroom, when you walk in that courtroom, it's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. Everybody knows that. They've seen the shows. Actually, what it is guilty until proven innocent. And the reason why is once you've gotten to that point to step into the courtroom, you've had months, if not years, of a narrative told about you in public that has poisoned the well of the jury system, of those peers that are going to hear your story and your defense. Secondly, when you walk into that courtroom, those people assume what you just said. They wouldn't have spent all this time and money to bring this person here unless he's absolutely done something wrong. And you know, God bless them for doing the goodwill of the people to get this taken care of. And so the heavy lift that somebody has, a Carlos Watson, to walk into that room, to believe that all sides are fair. How many months had you already gone through it?
You know, at that point, they arrested and indicted not only me, but my company, which was
they indicted the company.
Because they normally don't indict companies. Like they didn't indict Enron back in the day. They didn't indict Theranos or the Weinstein Company or FTX. So it's truly
none of those companies were indicted.
And remember, I was indicted not where I live and work in California. I was literally indicted on the other side of the country in Brooklyn, where I had no office, no employees, no executives, no major clients, no major investors. The only thing I had was a competitor who had wanted to buy me, and when he couldn't buy me, wanted to destroy me, who literally lives within blocks of the prosecutors and the judge. They all live, you know, in the same relative area. It's incredible how brazen this system is. And, you know, there's the phrase gaslighting couldn't be more true, because while they are out there breaking every rule and breaking every law, getting access to your confidential attorney-client privilege information when they shouldn't, selectively prosecuting you, lying about you and smearing you so that you're not presumed innocent until proven guilty, playing games with your jury so that I ended up with a jury that was anchored by 7 white men and no black men. Like, how is that even possible in Brooklyn? That's crazy. Like, think about what had to happen in order for that to be true. Like, literally, like, think about what had to happen so that I could have a jury of my peers in Brooklyn. I didn't say like in Idaho. I said in Brooklyn, New York, and there literally are no black men. How could you be in Biggie's backyard and literally there are no black men? It's insane, but that's part of how that works. And again, if you were to talk to the 3 white prosecutors on my case, a guy named Dylan Stern, a woman named Jillian Castor, another guy named Jonathan Siegel, they're all young, rich, white. They would tell you earnestly that they're public servants, that they're doing the right thing, that this Carlos guy is a bad guy, that he not only was not telling the truth then, he's still not telling the truth now. And if you pause him, they'd say, but tell us again why you prosecuted him on the other side of the country when he had nothing to do. they'd say, that's besides the point. We'll talk about that later. And then if you said to them, but wait, where's all this fraud? Like, does he have mansions? Does he have fancy cars? Does he have Swiss bank? No, he actually put money in. He never took it out. He was the lowest paid guy in the company. Even the FBI's forensic accountant says that he put in north of $5 million. They'd say, again, besides the point, we don't really want to talk about that. You'd say, well, what about Samir's 3 confession letters? Let's not put those in. And so it's a really, they have lost all sense, as best I can tell, of the pursuit of justice. And instead it's become, how do we win no matter what? How do we become part of that 99.6%? And again, when President Trump says, and I realize that, half the country are big fans and half the country aren't, but I really encourage those who aren't just to pause and hear the message, even if you can't embrace the messenger. He is not wrong. We do not have the system that you see in the movies and on TV. And it's not slightly different, it's dramatically different. And it would break your heart if you saw what was happening there. And worse yet, if you heard the people who run it talk about it, because they pretend as though it's the system we see on movies and in TV.
I'm curious, Carlos, as you were going through this, did they come to you with a plea agreement?
They didn't. It's clear that they wanted to make an example of me. And even that, the fact that, as you said, 97% of the time they're doing pleas, even for the roughly 2,000 people a year who go to trial, 98, 99% of them get offered a plea deal. They wanted to send a message with me. And to be clear, I'm innocent, and so I didn't want to have that conversation. But the right thing, the fair thing to do would be, if you're having that conversation with 98% of the other people, is to have that conversation as well. And so again, I hope that these next couple of years are going to be a time of reinvention and overhaul of our justice system, because it's hard to even call it a justice system. I don't know that it's delivering the justice that most Americans would hope that it would.
I feel like that we're in a time and a period that might be the most we've ever talked about the justice system. And part of it could be because of President Trump going through, the 4 cases that he has. And so there's been more of a spotlight on, what is this? Well, how does it work? Who are these people? How does the process work? But I do think that, we have reached a point in time where there's enough conversation of intelligent people knowing that, being the United States of America, we should have a better system. We should have a system that more people can believe in, to believe that justice can be found. When I'm talking through this, Carlos,
I really want listeners to hear that. I mean, think about what 99.6% means. Like, my phone doesn't work 99.6% of the time, right? Your planes don't land on time 99, but like, that sounds like a number out of the old Soviet Union, right? Like seriously, like that is, for a system that's built on innocent until proven guilty. Like, think about how off it has to be. It's the equivalent of a human being 900 pounds. Like, that's just, I don't care how you cut it. That's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's way outside the norm. And to pretend that everything is okay is, should worry us all. Because while it may be Brent today or Carlos today, it could just as easily be you, or could be your neighbor. And that's why we named the film Whose Son Is Next.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit, because you have a lot of people in this film, the 2-part film that you have, and it's in depth and it's powerful. And you have a lot of experts that come in there and they talk about, it's not just because it's Carlos, it's because of this case, the way that it was done. And, I think that I don't know if you feel comfortable in talking about that. There's more issues in this case that go beyond the prosecutors. It bleeds into the judge, of someone who happens to be a very wealthy judge. And I don't take that, God bless him for that. He's done well for himself. But as he came in as a judge, he is well invested in the companies that were perceived to be the victims in this case. And there was never, I believe, a conversation or recusal that, at least from his side, that ever came up. But this,
In fact, it was the opposite. At the very first pretrial hearing, he affirmatively said, I have no conflicts, only for us to find out later on that he had literally tens of millions of dollars in funds that owned Goldman, Google, Live Nation, and JP Morgan, all of which were folks in our case. Not only did he own millions in those companies, he was a co-investor. So he took his money and his fund's money and their money, and together they would invest in different companies over 18 times. He is his best friend, the guy who introduced him at his confirmation hearing, is the guy who was in charge of the investigation of Samir's phone call. You know, another good friend is the guy who stands to get the biggest restitution check. You know, he still sits on the board. And so it really, you know, in a world in which earlier this summer, that same circuit that covers New York, the Second Circuit, said that another judge whose wife, not even the judge himself, his wife had $15,000 in stock.
Yeah,
she had sold it before the trial was fully underway. They still said, hey, too much. It gives the appearance of conflict, and even the appearance is too much. And so you got to throw out the decision and take the judge off. And so we're saying, if that's true for 15 grand, what's true for 30 million or for 3 billion, right? Yeah. And so we have pursued that, and pursuing it all the way to the Second Circuit. And it wasn't just that. It really, you know, Harvard Law professor Ron Sullivan, who's considered an innocence icon, some people say he's helped overturn more wrongful convictions than anyone in history, and helped lead my trial, said it was the worst railroading he's seen in 30 years. And so that's a lot for someone to say. You know, one of our other lawyers was a retired judge. She's a decorated Marine, a major in the Marines, Shannon Friesen, called the judge the fourth prosecutor, said that the way that he excluded witnesses, we asked for 30 witnesses. He only gave us 3. He allowed the other side 25, so he wouldn't let Aussie investors testify, Aussie lawyers testify, Aussie executives. We'd had the CFO of the New York Yankees testify that not only had we not inflated our revenue, if anything, we had understated it to investors. So they were getting a steal. And wouldn't let them testify, excluded evidence. We submitted almost 800 pieces of evidence. We only got in maybe 25. So think about all the confession letters. Think about all the emails between Samir and the woman he seemed to be having an affair with. You know, think about the reports from the former Yankee CFO that said that we certainly weren't inflating revenue. If anything, we were probably understating it. All of those things didn't get in. So we definitely didn't feel, I didn't feel, and I know that Professor Sullivan and Judge Friesen didn't feel like we got a fair trial. And so it's one of the issues that we have brought to the Second Circuit. We've said, no matter what you believe about my innocence or guilt, this can't be the way. You have to feel like every person at least has a shot when they go in, not that the judge made his fortune off of these 4 companies who are coming in to testify, and now he's going to do what? He's going to help them, or is he going to hurt them, right? Like, you know, he literally made his money off of Google and Goldman, and now he's overseeing a trial with them. So I think it's going to be an important decision, and I only can pray that they will they'll do the right thing.
Well, I want to take a break here, because when we come back, I want to talk about being in that trial room, coming out just like it does with the jury, and hearing what you heard and then what happened next. But I want to recognize discoverability. Do you not like how you show up online? Many individuals think there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation on Google. Well, there's hope. It's called discoverability, and it can help you. Whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results after a negative news story, or even if you're just trying to position yourself a little bit better against businesses you're in competition with. Discoverability can also help you how you're portrayed on popular AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more, visit discoverability.co. They're even launching a do-it-yourself SEO option, a course for individuals who want to take on their search results on their own budget and speed. Listeners to Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with coupon code Nightmare Success. And I also want to recognize Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. So, Carlos, when all this is going down and you're getting thrown left and right in this courtroom, not getting what you're supposed to be getting. If you watch the documentary, you can feel it, you can see it. Time and time again, it's ruled against you, or he just gavels it down and says no. I mean, he's shaking his head one way. There were all kinds of things that happened in the courtroom. What were you thinking as this was going on, and being the guy?
I'm my grandmother's son, and so part of my focus was just to keep competing no matter what. I realized that it was skewed, that he was excluding our witnesses, excluding our evidence, that he literally was objecting for the other side. So they wouldn't even object because he would do it for them. And sometimes he would object and then overrule himself, which was basically almost, it would have been comedy if it wasn't real. The prosecutors wouldn't do a good job of asking questions. So he literally would start taking over the asking of the questions for them. He handed out the wrong jury instructions. So he literally dramatically lowered what it took to find me guilty. Basically, he told the jury, if you find that there's been any misrepresentation at all at OZY, whether Mr. Watson did it or not, you can find him guilty. Well, think about that standard, Brent. Like,
it's quite a standard, but that's the scary thing about conspiracy, of how the DOJ can wrap around people in conspiracy cases. You can be walking by something and you can be a part of a conspiracy. It makes me think about that. There's several guys that I've interviewed on this show that are from Michigan, and they were wrongly convicted of murder, and the Wayne County Integrity Unit knew that they had just felt like they had put too many people away. And I forget how it's only been, I think, 4 years or 5 years, and they've released 36 of the last count of people that were wrongly convicted of murder. So these things can happen and continue to happen and catch momentum on themselves. But when you're talking about the jury, I thought one thing that really caught my attention was there was a juror, a Black woman, who was interviewed on the show, who said that she was wanting to profess your innocence, and was fighting back and forth with this feeling of being the only person in the room. But she also said she got really confusing instructions from the judge that made her feel like she just was overwhelmed by the moment. And she said if she could have gone back, she feels horrible. And this is one person that would have changed the whole thing.
And again, it's in order to find someone guilty, it's got to be unanimous verdict. So all you need is one. And who knows how many other people felt the same way and just didn't say it.
Didn't say anything.
And so she said this out loud, and CNN reported it in the moment. So after the conviction, the judge went around and asked, "Does everyone agree?" Apparently, this was her first time ever being on a jury, so she didn't have a sense of what she could do and not do. There was a really, frankly, unsettling racial dynamic. The 7 white guys, she said, would have lunch every day. And even before I put on my case, according to her, would say, he's guilty, he's guilty. And she would say to them, that's not the way this is supposed to work. And you certainly aren't supposed to be talking about it out loud. And she finds herself in a jury room with some 6'4" guy standing over her, in her words, going nuclear, telling her you have to convict him. And so I know that the movies have us believing that everything runs smoothly, fairly. Nobody looks online. The judge doesn't wink at anyone. The prosecutors don't wink at anyone. That it's a fair jury of your peers. But I just, what I keep saying to people is it's possible that I'm a bullshitter, right? It's possible I'm just a really talented bullshitter who's just continuing on it, just going down the rabbit hole. But I said to them, but stop for a second. on the small chance that I'm not, if I'm not, and it turns out I'm the guy I've always been, which is a guy who builds things, creates things, hires inclusively, wins 2 Emmys, submits for multiple Pulitzers, really builds something that even the people who are trying to take me down wanted to buy for more than $250 million, right? They didn't think it was BS then, right? If I'm not, then what does that say? Like, if they can do this to me that easily, like how many other people? And I remind people that when the first folks came forward and said that priests in the Catholic Church were abusing them, it sounded like it was made up and people didn't believe them. And how many years did it take? And how many more people suffered because of that? And the number of people who said that they had been sexually assaulted, like how many people had to say it before there was some level of honesty about it? Or, how many Black men had to say, no, I wasn't resisting arrest. They beat the shit out of me for no good reason before people finally said, oh, that's what it looks like. It looks like someone putting a knee on your neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds while 3 other officers watch and stand guard and 17 other people literally take video of it. Like and so I just keep saying, guys, it is possible, but it's also possible not. And if they can do it that easily to me, who's fortunate to have a family that loves them, is fortunate to still have a relatively sound mind and body.
Yeah, and I love the support that your sisters have given, and they're in the documentary, and you're surrounded by people who really love you, and that's I know that gives you strength. But I'm curious too, because a lot of people, I've not talked to somebody who has taken the stand on your own defense in a case like this. What was that like, Carlos?
It was something that I thought was right to do, even though obviously you have a right not, to remain silent, right?
A lot of people don't.
Yeah, but I'm innocent, and I wanted to tell my story, and my hope was that the jury would start to kind of go, yeah, why is he being prosecuted in Brooklyn when he's in California, and how are they calling this company a fraud when frauds are like a fake blood machine, not a company that's like winning Emmys and getting nominated for Pulitzers and has newsletters that's going out to million and TV shows you can still watch. It's real, right? and has not 2 clients, but 229 clients. And these are super sophisticated clients. And this is a guy who had a board of directors. So it's not like he was doing it on his own. And he had 3 really expensive law firms that are supposed to make sure that fundraising is going well. And he had 4 investment banks, and he hired multiple accounting firms. And so if, my hope was that they would see that. But, as you probably saw in the documentary, the judge, interrupted me regularly, essentially rephrased my statements, would make faces behind me while I was on the stand, put his hand in his head, bump his knee, make it clear. His court reporter did the same thing. My lawyers had to ask that she not be allowed to do that.
I think you interrupted the opening and closing statements of your attorneys.
I mean, think about that. Even those of us who've watched movies, have you ever seen an opening statement interrupted and a closing statement? No. And just to be really clear, Brent, they weren't just interrupting, coughing. They were interrupting, essentially saying, Harvard Law professor Ron Sullivan, I think twice named Teacher of the Year at Yale when he taught there, and maybe once at Harvard, you're wrong. I mean, think about what you were saying to the jury at that point, right? On top of the fact that you have said in open court, you've called Ron and Shannon and others crazy. You've called them half-baked. You've said to their own interns, I hope you're not learning from Professor Sullivan because he's setting a bad example. Like, even if you genuinely believe that, who actually is brazen enough to say that out loud? And so, Brent, one of the questions a number of friends have asked, they've said, of course, really atypical for someone before sentencing to speak this openly. And I've said, look, the reality is the way that this Judge Eric Committee behaved, the brutality was so casual that this wasn't the first time he did it. Just wasn't. And I kept saying that to Ron. I said, Ron, if he can shush you like you're a little boy, if he can call you crazy and half-baked, if he can object for the other side dozens of times. If he can just casually exclude our witnesses and evidence. We had one witness who flew from Asia to testify. Brent, he made this guy fly in think about that. You fly in from Asia, from Japan to New York, so not New Jersey to New York, Japan to New York. You go back because they won't let you testify. You fly back in a second time. He ends court early so you can't testify, thinking that you won't come back a third time, and then you come think about that, right? And so it is, and what I've said is, not only am I innocent and do I want to prove my innocence, I said, but there are names like there's a young kid named Rashawn Russell. If anybody looks him up, he's a young 20-something kid who they basically did what they're doing to me to him. He's 20-something, first in his family to go to college, went to Babson, came out, I'm sure made his whole family proud, got a job at JP Morgan, at Credit Suisse, like a lot of young 20-somethings. He was trading Bitcoin. When the Bitcoin went down, rather than call it a mistake, all of a sudden this black guy's committing a crime, right? And now all of a sudden he's facing 10 years or something. And what I'm saying is someone's got to speak up, because if we keep allowing people this level of abuse, they will only become more and more emboldened. And so I'm clear that they will literally listen to what I'm saying and not be self-reflective at all, and not ask the question, is 99.6% a healthy thing? Is it healthy that we put not just our thumb, but our whole body on the scale and skewed it? Bad jury instructions, unfair jury, the whole thing. They're not going to do that. They're going to think, how do we hammer this guy and punish this guy harder? But again, they don't realize that I'm the great grandson of a runaway slave. And,
well, I mean, I think it's incredibly inspiring, and that you are doing this and being a voice for people who are afraid to speak out. It's a lot of courage on your part, Carlos, to take this time. I mean, you're a couple of weeks away from learning. I know you got appeals and everything else, but you've already experienced the day that they come out and the jury comes out and they give the verdict of guilty. Everyone's assumption usually in a white collar situation is that you're allowed to go home, get your affairs in order. You have time. You were immediately remanded to in custody. I can't even. I don't know what. I guess you could just tell me what when the world was going through your mind when all of that happened.
Yeah. It's surreal. They first, as this judge Eric Committee regularly did, he started with a what sounds like a reasonable position. Oh, I can't imagine remanding him. And then he would always say, unless, and this would be his cue to, his proteges on the prosecutor side, unless A, B, and C is true. And then of course they would say A, B, and C as though it hadn't all been prepped, and it was kind of kabuki theater. And all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, they say exactly the magic words. And before you know it, they're taking off my jacket, taking off my belt, taking off my shoelaces. And that's happening. And so, there's not a lot that is good and healthy there. And again, I'm not a martyr, but I also know being inside that I'm not the only one. I mean, I was in a facility where 3 people, they say died, inside everybody says murdered, but 3 people, think about that, 3 people in 5 weeks. How many people die in 50 weeks, right? Like that's
a very, very dangerous place. And I talked about this before we got on the interview. It's very transitory. Somebody can be there for a DWI or they can be there for murder. And it's very few people in solitary. They put people in general population, and you're just hoping that you don't get strung into an event that happens in any second something that can happen. I was there for 6 days, and I felt like it was the bottom of the barrel. And I told you I couldn't wait to get back to Leavenworth, which is a very strange statement. You were there for 5 weeks. And I think I don't remember what your bail was, but I remember it was a large bail.
They tripled my bail. My bail had been $1 million. They made it $3 million. Many people don't put up much in terms of hard collateral. They made us put up 85%. 4 retirement accounts, including my cousin, who's worked her whole life for the supporting the county in Texas, including another good family friend who's the dean at a university. 5 homes. They made us put up our family land. They got my 95-year-old aunt who worked in national security for 40 plus years. They tried to scare her. I really, more than 24 people, Brent, have filed formal complaints with the Second Circuit. So these are people who watch, and these aren't just family members. This is rabbi of the largest synagogue in Brooklyn, pastor of one of the largest churches, one of the board members at NPR. This is surgeons, others, people who just were so disturbed by what they saw.
They filed a complaint to the process.
They did. And so, again, we are hoping, we're praying that a light gets shined on this, because already since we filed our recusal motion, 2 other Black lawyers have come forward and said this judge, Eric Committee, has done the same to me. And yet, despite the fact that that's been raised, no one who's got investigative powers have come and said, okay, tell us who it is. Like, imagine if 2 other people came forward and said, I also was sexually assaulted. So 3, there would be a formal investigation, right? Or if 3 people said that they had gotten bitten by a dog, right? Like, that would be enough that people would want to say, let me understand. Or that 25 people wrote in and said, like, this is a really dangerous driveway. Like,
let's look at this.
Like, you would at least look at it. If nothing else, you'd be like, these are 25 serious people who went through the formal process of complaint. And so I say all of this more than anything just to explain to people who've been watching TV and movies all their lives and believe that we have a relatively fair system, except for 1 or 2 things. Again, I'm just saying it's possible that I'm a bullshitter, but on the small chance that I'm not, if all of this is happening to me, from a competitor being able to get you prosecuted on the other side of the country, to them invading your attorney-client privilege and stealing all of your defense plans from you, to them smearing your name even before trial so that the jury pool hears incorrect things, to choosing a jury that doesn't have any Black men on it, to the judge acting as to giving the wrong jury instructions, to, as you said, with Elizabeth Holmes, I think she had 2 children while she was out between conviction and that. So think about the difference. And they are now suggesting, as you know, Brent, that my minimum sentence be 22 years and my maximum be 37. And for people who are watching, Elizabeth Holmes, who was accused of $1 billion fraud, got 11 years, right? They're accusing me of 65 million, much less, but they want to give me double it. The average murderer gets 16 and a half years. Bernie Madoff got a huge sentence, but only served 13 years before he died, right? Jeff Skilling of
I mean, it would be a life sentence if you max out at 37. I mean, you're 55. I mean,
it's
to be 100 and whatever, but
even 22 is longer than the average American male.
Yeah, so it's beyond it's beyond all that. So where you stand right now, I know that you have this appeal that's out there.
We have an expedited appeal in front of the Second Circuit, and we've asked them. There's an extraordinary version of expedited appeal called mandamus, writ of mandamus. We've asked them. We've said this is such an extreme situation, from his deep, multifaceted conflicts to the way he actually behaved at trial, that you can't allow this to be normalized. You can't let this stand. This is like your high schooler, not just driving drunk, but driving the school bus drunk with all the kids and crashing. Like, you can't allow that person to go out again this Friday night. You have to stop the presses now and intervene. That's how significant this is. Don't know whether they'll do it or not. Right now, I'm scheduled to be sentenced 2 weeks from Friday, and the average white collar defendant who has got a clean record and who has no international ties would typically be allowed to go home, report to an institution 60, 90 days later, sometimes a little bit longer, depending on what's at stake, or even permitted to have bail pending appeal. Certainly what happened in July, where he remanded me right away, doesn't make someone hopeful that fairness will prevail.
I always ask this question, Carlos, to everybody on the show, but they're usually through their nightmare on the other side. But I feel like where you are now, what do you think's your greatest takeaway from this experience you've been through?
I don't mean to be Pollyannish to say this, but that I'm blessed. One of the things that was hardest, Brent, when I was inside was visit day. 95% of us don't get a visit.
Yeah.
While I wasn't clearly one of the hardened guys there, a lot of young guys came to me even in the 5 weeks I was there. Interestingly enough, they would bring me books because they saw that I read. Mm-hmm. So they would bring me books. They called me California or OG. But they would bring me books, and you could just see they're scared, they're lonely, they're not sure where to go. Mm-hmm. And I would get on the phones with some of their moms sometimes because some of the guys would not be getting the best advice from their lawyers, and they kind of needed a second person there. Like, you need someone else there. And so I might get on the phone with mom and say, hey, I know how hard this is, but you should try and come for that next meeting with the lawyer, and you should trust your judgment. And if you get to a place where you think that, so-and-so needs different help, you should trust yourself, and you guys should do that. And, you'd see the guys. I had one guy, looked like a professional athlete, 6'3", 220, chiseled, tattoos everywhere in face. And, he started crying on the yard with me. And you know how dangerous that is, Brent. I had to take him walking so that no one could see. Yeah. But he started crying because he knew that his lawyers were about to railroad him, and he couldn't get anyone to listen. Couldn't get his older brother to listen. Couldn't get his mom to listen, and he was just scared to death. So it's a long way of saying I hate what's happening. I'm not a martyr. I don't want this to happen, but I also am grateful for for the people who have been able to stand with me, which not everyone could, but there have been a number of people.
You remember those people.
You remember those people, and you ask yourself, have I been that good to other people?
Yeah.
And if not, how do I make sure if I ever have a chance to be that version of a person? My pastor has been so kind, and he said, Carlos, he said, maybe as bad as this is, he said, maybe on the other side of this, you get to be a greater blessing. And he said, maybe you'll come out of this ready to be of greater service to other people. So I hope he's right.
Well, I think that you are going to be and I see the fight in you and the will to fight, the courage. Mm-hmm. You're going to be a very powerful voice, and you've been a powerful voice, Carlos, throughout your life. This particular moment, how you use this, I think we need voices like you to be able to articulate what you're going through, how you feel about it, and what needs to be done. So I really commend you for putting yourself out there. This is going to release. We're doing this on Wednesday. I'm releasing this tomorrow as Thanksgiving. So we're going to try to get this out as fast as we can. But if somebody wants to help, Carlos, how I want to send everybody they can to your the YouTube 2-part series that's out there, because it's just it's really powerful. It's Whose Son Is Next, and like I said, it's got all kinds of different people on there that are experts, and then you've got the jury person. You've got all kinds of reasons why this is a story that needs to be heard. But if somebody wants to help, Carlos, is there a way to help?
Yeah, please find me on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram. Hit me with a note. I need help. I need voices. Spread the word. Shine a spotlight. I'm convinced if we keep the light on this thing on my case, that I will go free. I don't
Yeah.
think reasonable people who look at the facts can conclude anything other than I built a really good company and I'm getting railroaded,
Yeah.
and the judge's conflicts aren't something that anyone would be okay with. But the question is, will we keep the light on? The other thing I wanted to say, and again, not to be a martyr, but also to I want to I want to do whatever I can to um, I don't assume I can help, but if I could help, I want to I want to be of service. If there are folks who are going through something that for whatever reason, and I don't pretend to be omnipotent. I'm obviously going through something right now, and so I may or may not be able to help, but I certainly will try. And I certainly, as you said, I bring a I can hear differently and I can see differently, Brent. I certainly saw a lot of this. You can't be black in this country and not know that things don't always work out the way they tell you they do in the movies and TV, and you experience it every day. But um, but I'm I'm hungry to make a difference. I'm hungry to be on the other side of this, and I'm a believer that it does not have to be this way. We're too creative as a country. We're too creative as a people. We do too many amazing things to make this be our version of how we handle justice, right? Like this,
Yeah.
you just, it doesn't have to be that way. So, but please find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. Hit me up. I want to hear from you.
Oh, I appreciate that, Carlos, and your story, your voice, and offering to reach out when you're at your worst moment is powerful in itself. Talking about gratitude, I want to thank Homestead Financial lets me use this studio here and all their fancy lights and cameras and that. If you're looking for a book out there, I got one, Nightmare Success. I know it's a hassle, but if you can go to Nightmare Success In-N-Out and leave a review on Apple, it really helps the show. Check me out on BrentCassity.com, my website. I spell it wrong. It's with a TY, not a DY. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Carlos, man, I just want you to know I hope the best for you and the success of what you're going through. And I haven't known you for long, but man, I'm proud of you as far as the voice that you are.
Thank you. Hey, Brent, I appreciate you having me on. I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. And Brent, I want to give a shout out to your wife, even though I've never met her. The biggest lesson I've learned through all this actually is what many people have said all along. The greatest gift you could have in this life is a wonderful partner. And so for those of you, even who don't have trouble, don't have any problems, if you find that wonderful person, cherish her, him, make it something special, and there's goodness in that. So I hope you guys have a good Thanksgiving.
That's a great message. Great message, Carlos.
Okay.
Nightmare Success, In-N-Out.